Good morning. This is kind of the last of a series of 3 homilies that began 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, the homily was largely based on David Brooks' article. I promise this is the last week I'll refer back to that. But here's secular publications in the United States again. Why is America so sad? Full of all kinds of data that shows that we are so sad. Explosion of depressive illness, explosion of suicide across different age ranges. And then why is America so mean? Again, tons of data that shows that we have begotten increasingly coarse and mean. And then last week, the question, and it's a central question to the gospel, who do you say that I am? In part as an answer to what Brooks is really pointing to. What's he doing? He's looking at powerful societal problems. These are not just church problems or political problems or family problems or social. They cross all those barriers and they show up everywhere. And there's a third one, why are we so polarized? Again, the data shows that that's not an illusion. I quoted last night, there are metrics that we use to measure degree of how polarized Congress is. And it seems to be pretty good data. Haven't been this polarized and further apart in ideological camps since the early 70s, the last 5 decades. And the culture follows that. Congress is a reflection of the culture. Again, what was so surprising about Brooks is New York Times writer, writes big popular books, writing for Atlantic Monthly, secular publications for the most part, but he gives a spiritual diagnosis. and as I said, this is kind of rather, the article and David Brooks has gone kind of viral. The questions continue. There were more invitations for him to speak on all these blogs and on podcasts just this past week since the homily last week. He said something in one of the interviews that I've heard him say before. The diagnosis, polarization, sadness, meanness, coarseness. One of the big missing pieces, he says, is we have a culture that doesn't know what to do anymore with the reality of human suffering. We don't speak to it to our young people. He talked about we're missing moral formation. Included in that is a robust sense of how do we deal with suffering, a robust sense of the purpose of suffering. And so you have a culture that collides with what? He says what's the ultimate value in the United States? Is pursue your personal happiness to all ends. Pursue your personal happiness. That's the ultimate, right? Of course, it's a good thing to pursue happiness, personal happiness, but it's gotten divorced from each other. And so ironically, we speak about that all over the place. Ironically, you have tons of young people reporting immense frustration in the pursuit of that happiness and not making the connection. Remember I said a few weeks ago when I talked about this article, we're not marrying. Young people are not even forming, to the degree that they have in the past, serious dating relationships. Many people report the difficulty in forming friendships. So what do you see? Increasingly isolated and alone in the land of the plenty. Not making the connection, you're not going to find happiness if you make it a sole project. You do it alone. And the missing piece, the last of the third set, the missing piece of the diagnosis that I kind of set up last week You're certainly not going to find happiness without the willingness to sacrifice for the other, the good of the other. You're not going to find happiness if you have no framework within which to make sense of the necessary and the unavoidable suffering of life. And there are people in the culture that if you start to speak like that, will just kind of try and shout you down and shut you down. What are you talking about? The necessary suffering of life, the unavoidable suffering of life. As if that is an illusion, as if that's homily rhetoric. That's just religious speak, right? Really? As again, in frontline ministry for 34 years in parish work, what do I deal with all the time? The suffering of humanity. And of course, in my own life. Everybody here. I say this a lot. At the heart of this faith, and I think it's one of the things that led Christianity to go viral. And boy, did it. Think about something. How did Jesus and a few disciples radically transform a culture 2,000 years ago? And they did. You went from a little band of people to within 300 years, the mighty Roman Empire, right, not only starts to tolerate Christianity, by the end of that century, it becomes the official religion, spreading like wildfire. In part, it was this powerful message, the Christian meaning of human suffering. Look, it's not the end of all your dreams. It doesn't signal the defeat of your life's purpose. And here in the Christ, the suffering Christ, what does it teach? That love and sacrifice go together, that love and suffering go together, that it is, in fact, our deliverance. From death comes life. The great theologian of the last century, Paul Tillich, very, very popular, very well known. I think he died in the 60s. He says, people who endure suffering are taken beneath the routines of life. Listen to what he says. And find they are not who they believe themselves to be. The agony involved in, say, composing a great piece of music, or the grief at having lost a loved one, smashes through what they thought was the bottom floor of their personality, revealing an area below, and then smashes through that floor, revealing another area. He says suffering gives people a more accurate sense of their own limitations and of who they really are. It gives them a sense of what they can control and they can't. He says when people are thrust down into the deeper zones of life, something powerful is revealed. People in these circumstances, he says, often have the sense that they are, listen to this, are swept up in some larger providence. I know some of your stories. Many of you know mine because I've talked about them publicly. In the depth of suffering, and you get a wild sense of peace and a sense of that, what's he say? You're swept up in some larger providence. That somehow that your life is being guided by the hand of God. And that, as the Pastor's Corner said this week, you're not suffering alone. And that there is some purpose, some birth that is waiting to happen. Let me close with there's always too much to say on this topic. Kind of the prayer, the closing of the Pastor's Corner. The good news is that in the course of this, Christ makes two promises. First, we don't suffer alone. God is with us. He will always be with us and give us the strength to bear it. And second, our suffering is not meaningless when it is joined to the loving providence of God. May we ask for the grace, therefore, to steadfastly follow him, to answer robustly, "Who do you say that I am?" And to respond to what he said to Peter today, "If you would be my follower, courageously, with great confidence, take up your cross and follow me."